Imagine this for a second. You're deep inside a fortress. 4 feet of steel-reinforced concrete surround you. By every military standard of the day, you are completely, totally safe. You can hear the distant rumble of a war, but you believe they can't touch you. And then, the world doesn't just shake, it vanishes. So the question is, what kind of weapon can make concrete, steel, and people just disappear in an instant? Well, for one German soldier, this wasn't some hypothetical. It was a terrifying reality. This isn't from some dry report or a history book. This is the first-hand account of a terrified German soldier, Hedman Vera Hoffmann, probably scribbled down with a trembling hand on January 30th, 1944. He was at the Anzio beachhead, and through his periscope, he had just witnessed the impossible. A strong point, Bunker Louisa, which was rated to withstand any known artillery shell, was simply deleted from existence. 32 men inside, just gone. This moment? This was the combat debut of a weapon that wouldn't just break fortresses. It would break the very idea of a fortress. To really get the level of shock here, you have to understand the mindset at the time. By 1944, Germany had built its entire defense strategy on a foundation of concrete and steel. You hear about these famous lines, the Siegfried Line, the Gothic Line, the Gustav Line. These weren't just some trenches. No. These were massive, interlocking systems of thousands of bunkers and fortresses, stretching for hundreds and hundreds of miles. They were built to be impregnable. For the soldiers inside, these places were a symbol of German engineering, of permanence. They were supposed to be absolutely untouchable. And that was the exact question staring the Allies right in the face. A U.S. Army study back in 1940 had already come to a pretty chilling conclusion. Their existing artillery was, and I'm paraphrasing here, basically useless against these modern European forts. I mean, the biggest gun they had, the 155mm Long Tom, it could chip away at them, sure, maybe annoy the guys inside, but it couldn't reliably destroy them. So the Allies are facing this wall they couldn't go around, and it seemed they couldn't break through. They didn't just need a bigger gun, they needed a whole new way of thinking about destruction itself. And this was the answer. The M1 240mm howitzer. But listen, it wasn't just a bigger gun. It was a straight-up engineering marvel, born from a set of demands that seemed impossible. The U.S. Army needed a weapon that could be moved around the battlefield, yet could fire a shell with enough raw power to shatter feet of concrete from miles away, and do it with pinpoint accuracy. What came out of the Waterfleet arsenal in New York would become, quite literally, the Germans' worst nightmare. So let's just try to wrap our heads around the scale of this thing. 64,700 pounds. That's nearly 33 tons once it was set up to fire. That's heavier than 2 city buses parked on top of each other. This wasn't something you just wheeled into place. Oh no, it took a 14-man crew, a specialized crane, and hours of backbreaking labor, which included digging a massive pit for the recoil just to get it ready. It was an absolute monster. And what does a monster like that shoot? Well, it fired a single 360-pound high-explosive shell. That's the weight of 2 grown men, packed with almost 50 pounds of TNT, all delivered to one tiny spot. You know, German soldiers who survived these hits, they didn't describe it as a normal explosion. They called them earthquake shells. They said the ground would just heave and shake for hundreds of meters in every direction. And maybe the most terrifying number of all is this one. 14 miles. That was its effective range. Now, what does that really mean? It means the M1 could sit way back behind the front lines, completely unseen and unheard by the people it was about to obliterate. So for that German soldier sitting in his concrete bunker, there was no warning. There was no whistle of an incoming shell. There was just a sudden, world-ending cataclysm that arrived out of a perfectly clear sky. And this weapon just carved a path of destruction straight across Europe. It showed up at Anzio in January 44, cracking open the German defenses. 4 months later, it was the key to breaking the legendary Gustav Line at Monte Cassino. By July, it was blasting a path for the breakout from Normandy. Come September, it began to systematically take apart the supposedly unbreakable Siegfried Line, bunker by bunker by bunker. And by March of 45, it was clearing the way across the Rhine, right into Germany's heartland. This quote from Major Herman Smith, he was the commander of the very first unit to use this thing in combat, it just gets to the core of its power. See, it wasn't just physical, it was psychological. After just the first few days of firing at Anzio, captured German soldiers were completely and utterly demoralized. They told these stories of earthquake shells. And then the crucial thing happened. Soldiers started refusing orders to even go inside the bunkers. The one place you were supposed to be safe on the battlefield had suddenly become the most terrifying place on Earth. But here's the critical point, the thing that makes us even more terrifying. This wasn't just about random destruction. It was about cold, calculated, mathematical precision. The Americans had perfected this system called the Fire Direction Center, the FDC. So a forward observer, hidden miles away near the front, could just radio in the exact coordinates of a single German bunker. And then the FDC, using slide rules and firing tables and weather data, would compute a perfect firing solution. And that quote right there just brilliantly illustrates the new kind of war the Germans were facing. See, they were used to massive, indiscriminate Soviet artillery barrages. You just hunkered down, you endured them, and you survived. But this was different. This was personal. The Americans could pick out your specific bunker from 14 miles away and drop a 360-pound shell right on your head. That precision, that feeling of being hunted, that was a new and profound kind of terror. So you might be thinking, okay, this is just a story about a really big, really accurate cannon. But the true story, the reason this weapon fundamentally changed everything, goes so much deeper. It was really a symptom of a much larger, and for Germany, a much more terrifying reality. It was about two completely different philosophies of war and industry, clashing head-on. This chart right here, it illustrates it perfectly. On the American side, you've got the M1 240mm. They built 315 of them. They were mobile, took a crew of 14, and could be set up in hours. They were reliable and just brutally effective. Now look at the German side. They had their wonder weapons, like the Speer Gustav railway gun. They only ever built two. They were completely immobile, tied to a railroad, needed a crew of over 250 people, and took weeks to set up. You see the difference? Germany was focused on creating a few impossibly complex masterpieces. America, they focused on mass-producing weapons that were good enough and then making a whole lot of them. And that right there brings us to the real weapon. The howitzer, that was just the tip of the spear. The true weapon that broke the German fortresses was the American industrial and logistical system behind it. It was the ability to not just design and build one of these guns, but to build hundreds of them, to manufacture hundreds of thousands of shells, and then to create a supply chain capable of getting all of it to the front lines. The numbers behind the gun, they tell the real story. 315 howitzers built, over 500,000 rounds stockpiled in Europe by the end of the war. A 3,000-mile supply chain that stretched from a factory in New York all the way to a muddy field in France, delivering 18 to 36 tons of ammunition to each battalion every single day. I mean, this was a feat of logistics no other nation, Allied or Axis, could even dream of. German commanders weren't just afraid of the gun, they were terrified by the industrial power it represented. So, after 18 months of combat, what was the final result? What did this whole incredible system of destruction actually accomplish? Well, the final numbers they're just staggering. The U.S. Army Ordnance Department confirmed it. 3,114 individual bunkers and fortifications were destroyed by this one type of weapon. Now think about what that number means. Each one of those was a position that would have otherwise cost countless lives in a bloody infantry assault. And its effectiveness was just ruthless. Of all the fortifications that the 240mm went up against, 81% were completely destroyed. Another 13% were damaged so badly they were totally unusable. You do the math, that's a 94% success rate. When this gun was pointed at a fortress, that fortress effectively ceased to exist. But maybe the most telling statistic of all is this one, and it says everything about American manufacturing. 0. That is the number of M1 240mm howitzers that ever failed catastrophically in combat. In a war that was filled with experimental, unreliable technology, this weapon was a testament to incredible quality control. It just worked, every single time. The impact of this weapon, though, it went way beyond the physical destruction of concrete. Doctors who were treating German veterans after the war started to identify a new, unique form of psychological trauma. They called it bunker syndrome. It was a whole complex of nightmares, claustrophobia, panic attacks. These were men who, for the rest of their lives, could not enter concrete structures because this weapon had fundamentally and permanently broken the connection between bunker and safety in their minds. So, what's the legacy? What's the takeaway here? It's this. The M1 240mm howitzer did more than just win battles. It fundamentally changed warfare itself. For centuries, the static, permanent fortress had been a cornerstone of military strategy. This one weapon, backed by an industrial juggernaut, made that entire category of military architecture obsolete,
forever. It proved that in modern, industrial warfare, there is no defensive position that can't be breached, no bunker that can't become a tomb.
And I'll leave you with this final quote from a German commander on the Siegfried Line, because it says it all. The ultimate victory of the 240mm wasn't measured in shattered concrete, but in shattered morale. It was a weapon that broke the enemy's very will to fight. And it raises a final, pretty sobering question. What happens when a weapon becomes so powerful, so terrifying, that the very idea of safety itself is destroyed?